Margaret Hayward and Ethan Roberts, two names tied together by blood and circumstance, would come to define one of the most shocking crimes Willowbrook had ever seen. One was a quiet woman known for her kindness, the other a restless drifter with a history of deceit. When Margaret's lifeless body was discovered in her own home, it was the secrets they shared and the betrayals that followed that unraveled a chilling tale of greed, desperation, and a silent witness that refused to be ignored. Willowbrook was the kind of town where nothing ever seemed to go wrong. Tucked away from the chaos of larger cities, it boasted tree-lined streets, tidy homes, and a community that prided itself on knowing one another. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries over picket fences, children rode bicycles along the sidewalks, and the town's single police station rarely had more to handle than a lost pet or a minor fender bender. But on a cold October morning, that peaceful image shattered, leaving the community in a state of unease they had never known before. Margaret Hayward had lived in Willowbrook for over 30 years. A retired schoolteacher in her 70s, she was widely regarded as one of the kindest souls in town. Margaret was known for her gentle smile, her love of baking, and her unwavering dedication to the children she had once taught. Even in retirement, she remained active, volunteering at the local library and hosting book club meetings in her cozy living room. To those who knew her, Margaret represented everything good about their small town. That was why her absence over the weekend was immediately noticed. Margaret had a routine, one that her neighbors had come to recognize like clockwork. Each morning she would step out onto her porch to water the plants in her window boxes, greeting passers-by with a cheerful wave. When Monday morning arrived and her neighbor, Linda, realized she hadn't seen Margaret in days, alarm bells began to ring. It wasn't like Margaret to disappear without a word. Linda decided to check on her. As she approached Margaret's house, a sense of unease began to creep over her. The blinds were drawn, the mailbox overflowing with letters, a stark contrast to the neat and meticulous home Margaret kept. After several unanswered knocks on the door, Linda tried the handle. To her surprise, it turned easily. The scene that greeted her inside was something she would never forget. The living room, usually tidy and inviting, was in disarray. A coffee table had been upended, books scattered across the floor. Margaret's favorite armchair was askew, and a lamp lay shattered beside it. But it was the sight of Margaret herself that made Linda gasp in horror. The elderly woman lay motionless on the rug, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Her once cheerful face was now pale and lifeless. The police were called immediately, and within minutes, the quiet cul-de-sac was buzzing with activity. Officers cordoned off the area, and neighbors gathered outside, exchanging whispered speculations about what had happened. The town, which had never experienced anything like this, was plunged into a collective state of shock. Inside the house, detectives began piecing together the scene. There were signs of a struggle: broken glass, overturned furniture, but little else. No sign of forced entry, no immediate indication of what could have led to such violence. One detail stood out to the investigators: a porcelain ballerina figurine, shattered into pieces on the floor. It seemed unimportant at first glance, but its placement, just inches from Margaret's body, struck Detective Rachel Mendez as oddly deliberate. As Margaret's body was taken away and the forensic team began their work, one thing became clear: this was no random act. Something or someone had brought violence to Willowbrook, and the community's cherished sense of safety would never be the same again. The investigation into Margaret Hayward's death began with a sense of urgency. Crimes like this were unheard of in Willowbrook, and the pressure to find answers weighed heavily on the police. Detective Rachel Mendez, a seasoned investigator who had transferred from the city a few years earlier, led the case. Though the town rarely faced anything more serious than petty theft, Rachel's experience told her that this was no ordinary crime. Every detail, no matter how small, needed to be examined. As the team combed through Margaret's home, the picture of her final moments began to emerge. The living room bore clear signs of a struggle. An overturned coffee table suggested a scuffle, while the shattered ballerina figurine hinted at something or someone colliding with it during the altercation. However, there were no signs of forced entry. This detail stood out to Rachel. If the perpetrator hadn't broken in, could Margaret have known her attacker? A search of Margaret's belongings provided few immediate clues. Her life appeared simple and routine. She had no history of conflict, no known enemies, and no family members nearby, except for a niece who lived 2 towns over. Her bank records, however, raised eyebrows. Margaret had recently withdrawn several large sums of money, an unusual pattern for someone who lived modestly and rarely spent on more than groceries or the occasional gift for friends. The withdrawals totaled thousands of dollars, an amount that puzzled investigators. What had Margaret needed the money for? Neighbors were interviewed, each offering a portrait of Margaret as kind, gentle, and utterly unassuming. But a few mentioned something curious in the weeks leading up to her death. A young man had been seen visiting her home. He was described as tall and thin, with dark hair, but no one could recall his name or his purpose. He didn't appear to be a delivery worker or handyman, and his visits were sporadic, always during the late afternoon. Some neighbors had assumed he was a relative, perhaps a grandson, but Margaret had never mentioned him to anyone. Among the items collected from the scene, one stood out: a small, antique clock on the mantel. It appeared undamaged, but its inner workings had been tampered with. The clock was slightly ajar, as if someone had opened it to search for something. This oddity caught Rachel's attention. Why would anyone bother with a clock in the middle of such chaos? Was it simply knocked over during the struggle, or had it been intentionally examined? The discovery of the clock's disturbance deepened the mystery, but it also offered a glimmer of hope. Rachel suspected it might hold a clue, a hidden compartment, perhaps, or evidence overlooked in the initial sweep. She ordered the clock to be sent to the forensic lab for closer examination. Meanwhile, the investigation into Margaret's financial records and the identity of the mysterious visitor continued. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the two were connected. The large cash withdrawals suggested a significant event or transaction, but there was no record of where the money had gone. The young man, whose visits were now suspicious, became a person of interest. If he could be identified, he might hold the key to unraveling the events leading to Margaret's death. The shattered figurine, the unexplained cash, the mysterious visitor, and the tampered clock, each piece added to the growing puzzle. Yet the more Rachel uncovered, the more questions seemed to emerge. The case was far from straightforward, and the answers, she feared, might reveal something far darker than anyone in Willowbrook was prepared to face. Weeks passed, and despite the police's best efforts, Margaret Hayward's case seemed to be slipping further from resolution. The peaceful streets of Willowbrook had taken on a new atmosphere, one of unease and quiet suspicion. Neighbors who once greeted each other with warmth now exchanged wary glances, wondering if the culprit might still be among them. The forensic examination of the shattered ballerina figurine turned up something unexpected. Among the porcelain shards, a single strand of dark synthetic fabric was found, snagged on the jagged edges. This discovery offered a faint hope. It wasn't much to go on, but in a case as sparse on leads as this one, even the smallest detail mattered. The strand didn't match any of Margaret's clothing, suggesting it belonged to someone else, perhaps the person responsible for her death. Meanwhile, investigators delved deeper into Margaret's financial activities. The large withdrawals in the weeks before her death still loomed as a critical piece of the puzzle. The money had disappeared without a trace: no checks, no electronic transfers, no purchases of any significance. It was as though the cash had simply vanished. Interviews with Margaret's niece revealed a shocking revelation. Margaret had recently inherited a diamond necklace from her late sister. The necklace, an heirloom rumored to be worth tens of thousands, was meant to be passed down through the family. The necklace was not found among Margaret's possessions, and its absence raised immediate questions. Had someone targeted Margaret specifically for the jewelry? The possibility suggested a premeditated act, something far more calculated than a simple break-in gone wrong. As the team worked to connect the dots, the mysterious young man seen visiting Margaret's home became the focal point of their investigation. After piecing together witness descriptions and analyzing footage from nearby security cameras, they identified him as Ethan Roberts, a distant relative Margaret had recently reconnected with. Ethan had a criminal record, albeit for non-violent offenses, petty theft and forgery. He was known for drifting between towns, often leaving a trail of deceit behind him. Ethan was brought in for questioning, but his answers were evasive. He claimed he hadn't seen Margaret in over a month, denying any involvement in her death. When confronted with the evidence of his visits to her house, he insisted they were purely social, an effort to rekindle family ties. Yet Ethan couldn't explain how fibers matching the one found on the figurine were also present on a jacket retrieved from his belongings. Margaret's niece added another layer to the mystery. She disclosed that Margaret had expressed concerns about the necklace shortly before her death. In a phone call, Margaret mentioned feeling uneasy about having it in her home and hinted at taking steps to protect it. This revelation led investigators to wonder if Margaret had hidden the necklace somewhere before her death, and if so, where. Attention returned to the tampered clock. Rachel Mendez felt certain it wasn't a coincidence. She personally examined the antique piece and discovered a tiny, almost imperceptible latch at its base. When pressed, it revealed a hidden compartment. Inside was a folded note in Margaret's neat handwriting. It read, "If anything happens to me, the truth is in the clock." The discovery sent chills through the investigative team. What truth had Margaret hidden? Why had she felt the need to leave a cryptic message instead of going directly to the authorities? The note, coupled with the necklace's disappearance, pointed to a level of fear and awareness on Margaret's part that no one had previously suspected. As these revelations came to light, one thing became increasingly clear: Margaret's death was not the result of a random act of violence. It was the culmination of a deliberate plan, one rooted in greed, betrayal, and secrets that had yet to be fully uncovered. The silent witness, a shattered figurine and a disturbed clock, held the key to unraveling it all. The discovery of Margaret Hayward's hidden safe and its contents provided the investigation with a new sense of direction. Detective Rachel Mendez now had tangible evidence linking Ethan Roberts to Margaret in the months leading up to her death. The ledger, with its cryptic entries, hinted at a story of manipulation and fear, a calculated scheme that had escalated to fatal consequences. But Rachel also knew that circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. To bring justice to Margaret, she needed undeniable proof of what had occurred. Ethan, still under surveillance, became the focus of a deeper investigation. His financial records showed no sudden influx of cash, and his activities in recent months didn't suggest he had the missing necklace. This raised a troubling question: if Ethan hadn't profited from Margaret's death, had someone else been involved? Determined to uncover the truth, Rachel revisited the timeline of Margaret's final weeks. The cash withdrawals, the tampered clock, and the young man's visits all pointed to mounting pressure on her. But the ledger entry labeled "Final Step Resolved" gnawed at Rachel. Margaret had clearly anticipated a confrontation, but had she been planning to take matters into her own hands? Or had she reached out for help, only to have her trust betrayed? While the investigative team focused on Ethan, Rachel turned her attention to Margaret's community. Interviews with neighbors revealed a surprising detail. Linda, the neighbor who had discovered Margaret's body, mentioned seeing a second visitor at Margaret's home just days before the murder. This person, a middle-aged woman, had arrived in a sleek black car and stayed for over an hour. She hadn't been seen before or since. The description of the woman led Rachel to Margaret's niece, Amanda. When questioned, Amanda confirmed she had visited her aunt shortly before her death. She admitted that Margaret had been acting unusually paranoid, speaking in vague terms about making things right. And not letting it happen again. Amanda had dismissed her aunt's concerns at the time, chalking them up to the eccentricities of an aging woman. Now, though, she wondered if there had been more to Margaret's cryptic remarks. Amanda also revealed something unexpected. Margaret had confided in her about Ethan. She had mentioned her concerns about his intentions, but had stopped short of accusing him outright. Amanda had urged Margaret to distance herself from Ethan, but her advice seemed to have gone unheeded. Rachel pressed Amanda about the missing necklace. Amanda insisted she hadn't seen it and knew nothing about its disappearance, but her unease during the questioning left Rachel suspicious. Could Amanda have been more involved than she was letting on? The possibility of familial betrayal added another layer of complexity to an already tangled case. Meanwhile, the forensic analysis of the ledger revealed faint impressions on one of the pages, suggesting something had been written and then torn out. Using specialized techniques, technicians reconstructed the missing text. Wednesday decision made. No going back. The date matched the day before Margaret's murder. The revelation sent a chill through Rachel. Margaret had made a decision, a critical choice that seemed to seal her fate. Whether it was a decision to confront Ethan, hide the necklace, or take some other action remained unclear. But the deliberate tone of her words suggested she knew she was taking a risk. As the investigation pressed forward, a new piece of evidence surfaced. A local pawn shop owner came forward, claiming a man had tried to sell him a diamond necklace shortly after Margaret's death. The necklace was a fake, a well-crafted replica, but its existence raised significant questions. If the real necklace was still missing, who had created the forgery? And why had they gone to such lengths to replace it? The pawn shop owner's description of the man didn't match Ethan. Instead, it pointed to someone unexpected, a neighbor who lived directly across the street from Margaret. Quiet and unassuming, he had lived in Willowbrook for years without drawing attention. Yet his sudden involvement in the case suggested he might have been watching Margaret more closely than anyone had realized. With this new lead, Rachel felt the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. The forgery, the safe, the withdrawn cash, and the ledger all pointed to a web of deception that went beyond Ethan's schemes. Someone else had seen an opportunity and seized it, leaving Margaret to pay the ultimate price. The investigation now entered its most critical phase, as Rachel worked to uncover the full truth before it slipped away entirely. The investigation into Margaret Hayward's death had taken more twists than Detective Rachel Mendez had anticipated. As new details emerged, the portrait of a seemingly idyllic life shattered into a web of secrets, greed, and betrayal. The neighbor across the street, a man named Peter Langston, had lived in Willowbrook for over a decade. Quiet and reserved, Peter had rarely drawn attention. But his connection to the forged necklace thrust him into the spotlight as a potential player in the dark chain of events that had led to Margaret's death. Peter was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied any involvement, claiming he barely knew Margaret beyond polite exchanges over the years. But when confronted with the pawn shop owner's description and records showing Peter's purchase of forgery materials online, his calm demeanor began to crack. Under pressure, Peter admitted to creating the fake necklace, but he insisted he had nothing to do with Margaret's death. He claimed he had been approached by Ethan Roberts, who offered him a cut of the profits if he could replicate the heirloom. According to Peter, Ethan had spun a tale about needing the replica for a harmless swap, something about family drama and appeasing Margaret without upsetting other relatives. Peter, who was struggling financially, saw an opportunity to make quick money. He claimed he had no idea Ethan might have had more sinister intentions. The forged necklace had been completed and handed over shortly before Margaret's murder. Rachel was skeptical. Peter's role in the forgery might have been minor, but it placed him squarely in the chain of events. His willingness to fabricate the necklace suggested he was not as innocent as he wanted to appear. However, his account aligned with other evidence pointing to Ethan as the central figure. Ethan was brought in for further questioning. The forensic evidence, the ledger, and Peter's testimony painted a damning picture. Faced with the mounting evidence, Ethan finally cracked. He admitted to pressuring Margaret for money, using their tenuous family connection to manipulate her trust. He had learned about the necklace through casual conversations and saw it as a way to solve his mounting financial problems. Ethan claimed he had coerced Margaret into withdrawing money under the guise of helping her manage her affairs. When she resisted handing over the necklace, he enlisted Peter to create the replica. Ethan's plan had been to swap the real necklace with the fake one, leaving Margaret none the wiser until it was too late. But something had gone wrong. On the night of Margaret's death, Ethan arrived at her house, intending to make the switch. According to his confession, Margaret confronted him, having realized his true intentions. A heated argument ensued, and in the struggle Ethan shoved her. The impact caused her to fall, striking her head on the edge of the coffee table. Panicked, Ethan fled, leaving the scene in chaos. The confession brought some clarity but also left lingering questions. Ethan maintained that Margaret's death was unintentional, but Rachel suspected there was more to the story. The tampered clock, the note, and the missing real necklace all hinted at a level of forethought that didn't align with a purely accidental death. The final breakthrough came when investigators discovered the real necklace hidden inside a hollowed-out book in Ethan's apartment. Its discovery not only solidified his guilt but also provided closure to one of the most pressing questions in the case. In the end, Ethan was charged with manslaughter, theft, and fraud. Peter faced charges for his role in the forgery, though his cooperation earned him a lighter sentence. Margaret's community, once so tightly knit, struggled to recover from the tragedy. Her death served as a grim reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath even the most peaceful surfaces. For Rachel, the case was a testament to Margaret's quiet courage. Despite her fear, Margaret had taken steps to protect herself and leave clues for those who would seek justice for her. The clock, the figurine, and the hidden note had spoken on her behalf, revealing truths that otherwise might have been buried forever. In the end, the silent witness had been heard.